Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Green Dragon Podcast. I'm your host, Aiden.
I'm your fellow host, Tom, and today we have a guest, our first guest ever, Isaac Gibson, who is a classmate of mine from school, and we've been great friends ever since we met each other. And um, we got to talking and thought it'd be great to get onto the podcast together. So, welcome, Isaac.
Thank you, Tom. I'm really glad to be here with both of you.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, Isaac. And this is our first time chatting, but I can already tell that we're probably gonna have to have several podcasts and probably have to have you back on several times. You're actually taking the place of Jake tonight. Jake's out sick. He lost his voice, so we figured, having somebody that can't speak probably wasn't the greatest idea on a podcast.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't feel like sign language followers you have. And I don't even know if he knows that, but
yeah, I think if Jake tried to do sign language, we might have more people that decided to leave the podcast than stick around for it. I don't know how good his sign language skills are.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, today we've got so much stuff to cover. I was telling Tom before we got started tonight that I felt like the week started off slow. Last week after we recorded, I felt like there was a little bit of news, and then all of a sudden, everything just kind of like dumped. Like it was like Monday and Tuesday. Like it was Monday and Tuesday this week where I was going through all the news sources I typically go through, and I was like, holy cow! I was planning on having like maybe three or four news bullet points this week, and it went up to 10 or 11, and I was like, well, we might have to make two podcasts this week.
Mhm.
just just
Yeah,
just just to cover everything. um
really.
but the main topic, and the reason we got Isaac on is we wanted to cover the topic of the transgender issue, and the
Epidemic.
over epidemic. Yeah, that's a better word for it. Yeah, the transgender epidemic, not only in the US but also I think as in the world as a whole. But I think we'll focus more on the US because it seems to be a particularly um, prominent issue that's discussed here in the US, especially in the current political climate we're in. Um, so yeah, I think if Isaac, if you're up for it, we'll get started with some current news, and then feel free to chime in, and then we'll jump right into our main topic for today.
Sounds great.
All right, so guys, the first thing I wanted to bring up today, and we'll start with domestic news, like we always start with domestic, and then we kind of go over to world news. But the um, news headline that kind of gave me the most the most laughs, I guess, which is sometimes rare to come across. Most of the time, I just shake my head in disappointment when it comes to news, especially nowadays. But the one that really got me laughing, and I know Tom has a little bit to say about this, was what President Biden said about Kamala Harris. Tom, I don't know if you want to give the listeners a little bit of rundown on what our president decided to say about our vice president.
He said something to the effect that she was the greatest black Indian, and then he rephrased black Indian woman that has ever been in politics, and she's great. Pretty much is
That's
what he
the
said.
that's
It
quite
was,
the that's quite the title there. Wow.
I
Yeah,
know.
yeah. I think he said she something along the lines of like she was the most accomplished, or something like that. Most accomplished, and I was like, what is she accomplished? Please tell me. I love to hear.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I mean, I guess she was is accomplished in being chosen as vice president, but that's not really an accomplishment. That's just something that's been given to her.
Yeah, yeah. It always makes me laugh. When I hear, like, I feel like I don't understand why people get excited that she's the first female vice president. I think there was a lot. better choices. I think she just kind of fit a profile that they were looking for. Like we discussed that Candace Owens, and Candace Owens got on she's on the Real Daily Wire. I think she would have been a far better choice as a female vice president, or Tulsi Gabbard, and that was another one we talked about on the podcast. I think both of those women are far better qualified, definitely much better spoken. I mean, Kamala got up and gave an address in South Korea and said North Korea is one of our greatest allies and has been for a while. So
And of course,
yeah, yeah.
Would have been a better vice president, I mean, just like in general, because obviously not for the Democrats, but
Oh, sure. I'm just saying, yeah, absolutely. I'm saying for the people in general. I think, yeah, yeah. I don't think the Democratic Party would have chosen either of them, Candace or Tulsi Gabbard. But it
and
is
the
what it.
thing kind of rocks my cradle in the wrong way is they make statements like, oh, she's the most accomplished, or when everyone makes statements like this is the most accomplished person in their field, like you can say that all day long, but unless you actually have hard facts for that, it's like you're just spewing out nonsense, really. um like I could say that sentence to anyone about anything, but if I don't have to back it up, it's like, what are you talking about? Like, what is I mean, despite, like, aside from the fact that she is black and Indian, so to whatever, however he says it, like, what has she done besides being a black woman that has actually, like, made her accomplish anything? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think actions definitely speak louder than words, and there's a whole lot of words going on, not a lot of action, especially from. I mean, has she done anything? I mean, really, since she's become vice president, other than receiving the title of vice president, I can't name one thing she's done. Besides make a fool of herself. Um, she's been able to go through 3 speechwriters. I know that, but that's really about it.
It's probably because those speechwriters didn't know how to repeat their sentences very well.
You're
Like,
probably
good for the people, do the good thing for the people, which is good. Like, they weren't writing those things for her, so
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know how to read. I can't say it 7 times.
uh, yeah. I mean, it's just I feel like I feel disappointed. I feel disappointed in our ability to choose leaders that are capable of making even small decisions. I mean, it really is. It's telling of where our society is these days. That we can elect somebody that really doesn't have or shouldn't be in a position like that. They really have no business being there.
I mean, there's obviously a lot of different factors behind that. It's not like people just kind of, like, chose Biden to be the leader because he was a very popular person or the Democratic Party has anything really to offer. It's all about pushing ideologies, and there is nothing easier for a populace to absorb than a really trending ideology. And for the left, it was anything going from like the BLM movement to transgender to saving the planet, all of these huge topics that, like, people just soak that up and they focus on that. It doesn't really matter who's in charge of making policy to get those ideologies confirmed. They just need someone to do it. And so, like, so many people are just so willing to be like, just put anybody in office that shares these ideologies because they just want to see those things completed. And that's what we're seeing right now with Biden, especially, is that he is so much more focused on, um, you know, providing gender affirming care for underage and, like, very underage kids who have no idea what's going on, rather than deal with these threats that are foreign and domestic, especially like with our border or across the seas. Like, it's kind of it's kind of crazy. And I saw in Tom's list of topics tonight the ESGs, the topic of ESGs, and I think a lot of it has to do with that. A lot of companies lobbying politicians to promote policies that encourage these ESG programs for all these corporate businesses in America, that forcing their CEOs to implant these protocols for environment. What is it? Environment. I can't remember the acronym. Environment,
Security,
social, security.
yeah.
And what's it again, Tom?
It's like environmental social governance.
And governance is the last one. Yeah. So I mean, and there's a lot of money to be found in that, because if you can fine people, tax people if they don't follow those things, it all kind of comes back full circle to the leadership. And you can really see it if you kind of take a step back, and kind of look at everything. Like it's pretty crazy. But that was a very general overview. But
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's frustrating to see the focus put on a lot of these quote woke issues when there's bigger issues at play, especially when it comes to our national security too. I know you touched on that a little bit, but when we have infiltration from the Chinese government, to the extent that it is in our country right now, as far as their surveillance on us, and I mean, there's countless examples of their espionage. Actually, this week, one of the things I highlighted was the DOJ actually charged two Chinese intelligence officers with attempting to interfere with the prosecution of a significant Chinese telecommunications company. And this was a issue that we discussed in one of our first podcasts, I think. But with a lot of these Chinese telecommunications companies, they were bringing over cellular, towers and satellites to. They were setting them up and putting them in areas and essentially stealing sensitive information off those towers. And they were putting them up essentially for free, just because these companies are owned by the Chinese government. They're operated by the Chinese government. They're funded by the Chinese government, the CCP. So they're able to, come in and set up, 500 cellular towers for free, because they know they'll be able to gain sensitive information. They'll be able to steal intelligence. They'll be able to steal information. That's what they're in the business of. But yeah, apparently these two intelligence officers were caught trying to bribe. I think it was. I could be wrong on this. I think they were trying to bribe some government officials into letting this telecommunications company off. So it's interesting to see. I mean, this is just one case, but if this is one case, there has to be hundreds of others like this case, where we're seeing probably not only the Chinese but also the Russian government, Indian government. I mean, at this point we have so many enemies, and we don't even really realize it. We're just kind of, I feel like we're letting people walk all over us currently, as far as our policies go. But it is interesting to see this focus of the public drawn away from big issues like that are national security issues that really affect us and our long-term safety as citizens, and put towards issues like critical race theory, transgenderism, all these kind of woke issues. And it's kind of it's a game of smoke and mirrors, in an attempt to distract us from our government's inability to actually protect and serve us as citizens.
yeah, I don't know if you guys ever watched the show, but it kind of reminds me of this Game of Thrones. It's like the same idea where we're trying to go for the same power.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have the one family who's starts a rebellion because their leader's head was cut off unjustly by this horrible mad king, and all these other powers are coming in. Everyone's claiming the rightful heir to the throne. And there's a kind of madness that gets instilled. You can kind of feel from the TV show, like all the characters have this kind of madness that's built into their veins from this whole thing going on. And that's what it kind of feels like now. It's like there's this kind of madness spreading throughout the world with this balance of powers that is trying very trying very hard to find an equilibrium, but everyone sees the equilibrium of power is with them on top, and so there's a lot of turmoil comes from that, obviously, um, but it is interesting, yeah, and kind of kind of sobering in the same at the same time. It's it really scares me to think that like countries like Russia and China, these big countries that have all these small ways of infiltrating us, like you say, um, analogous to like the Game of Thrones, where like there are spies everywhere. They call them little birds that are listening all the time. Um, and but for most people on the day to day level, like we don't really see the effect of it, except for at the gas pump. Um, we really don't see the effect of these things, and so it's really hard for people to stay um, or even be active in participating in this battle of powers. This also the spiritual battle too that's happening underneath everything. Um, yeah, it kind of makes you like wonder, as an average citizen, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to? How am I supposed to act? Um, they often say that local government is the most powerful, most influential way to get things done. But at this point, for most people looking at the news, it's like this is so beyond that. Like, what am I supposed to do? This is crazy.
Yeah, it's overwhelming, I think, for most people, and I think that's one of the reasons it's just so easy to sit back and say, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah,
Why even try, right? Yeah,
yeah,
it's. I mean, even for me, I mean, I even just doing the little bit of research, for this podcast and on current events, it's overwhelming to see the amount of cases where it's just like everything that you stand for, that you live for, your morals is just kind of being stripped away. And it's being stripped away right in front of your eyes. And there's really, I mean, so little you can do about it. But I think that's why, Tom, maybe you can comment on this too, but I think that's, why we started the podcast and why we started Lifeline too, is just to bring conversations and power back to everyday people, because I feel like that's been something that's been slowly over time eroded, stripped away from us as American citizens. We've become more reliant on our government. We've let that dictate how we act and ultimately live on a daily basis. And we should we should really fight to take back some of those rights we've given up over the years, and get back to where, I think that's the goal of this, is to get back to the vision that our founders saw in America, because I think that's the only really light that can shine in a world of CCPs and dictators like Putin and Kim Jong, and yeah.
Yeah, because it's something that is unspoken about. I learned it in school, but like how America was the only nation founded by mankind with the free worship of God. So, like, that was the foundation on which everything else was built. So, it had God as a center. And if you look at where our freedoms have been taken away in America, that's all pretty much out of a hatred or an anger to God. And the best way to attack God is to attack with his creation. So like with marriage and the family, that's the main thing attacked because that's the greatest image and reflection of him. And America was a great place because it enabled anyone to raise a family here, anywhere, doing anything.
Yeah.
So it gave people the ultimate freedom to decide what they think was the best way to live their lives with the people they loved. And so when you see like all this terrible stuff happening, it's essentially them trying to take away that fundamental freedom of having a family.
Yeah. I think that's really well said. And I think that actually, I think that has a lot to do with our main topic today. You mentioned that um, a lot of the things that are going on today are done out of almost a hatred or spite for God or to God. Um, and I think one of the most precious things that God gives us is the human body. Um, we're made in the image and likeness of God. And so to look at your own body or look at somebody else's body and not look at it as something beautiful and as something sacred, but to look at it as something you can change and manipulate to how you see it fit. As almost like it's an object. It's something that can be completely manipulated. I think that's something that stands out to me, especially in the topic of transgenderism. That it's a very selfish approach to life in general, but also it's a selfish approach to the gift that we've been given by God of the human body, because the human body is really something beautiful and something precious, and it's essentially a mutilation of that. It's it's a mutilation of something that was made to be perfect. But I don't know if you guys want to. I mean, we've got so much to talk about in the news, but we've also got so much to talk about in transgenderism. I don't know if you guys are kind of ready to transition a little bit over to transgenderism, just to get things going here and get that conversation going.
I'm ready to dive in.
All
And
right,
actually,
cool.
retort, not retort really, but just kind of respond to what both of you have said so far. I was thinking about this today actually, and trying to get my thoughts collected for this podcast. I was trying to think like, why are these things like transgenderism or like equal rights or CRT? Why are all these things happening? Why are all these things like, where did all this stuff come from? And obviously, I don't know exactly where. Can't like pinpoint with all the particulars where all these things come from in the human psyche, but you can definitely look at kind of more of a general view of where or why these kinds of phenomena would happen. Like 15 years ago, not that many people were coming out as transgender. And if you look at all the statistics, like over the years, it compounds how many people are coming out with this. Like we said at the beginning, it's like an epidemic. This kind of like trend of transgenderism. I think that a lot of these kinds of things come about because, well, human beings are, for all the way back into ancient times, have always looked to something beyond themselves for some sort of purpose or guidance or moral code or origin, right? Like every single every single culture and people has had some sort of series of gods or some sort of series of religious ideals that guided them or helped them understand the world around them, right? And if you cross reference all of those different religions and stuff like that, you'll see a lot of similarities because the human mind isn't really all that much different when you go across different cultures. You might do different things, but everyone kind of has the same kind of basic understanding of nature and themselves and where things kind of come from, and that there needs to be a place from which things to come from. But in the modern age, and I think with a lot of the modern thinkers, and when I say modern thinkers, I'm thinking more of like Kant and like Rousseau and people like those, Hobbes. They've very subtly infiltrated the kind of the global psyche by introducing ideas that eventually lead to the conclusion for most secular people that there's no such thing as a God, or there's no such thing as something other than myself. And so you have the advent of the self, this huge movement within like the global psyche of people just like deciding that there is nothing beyond my own self. There's nothing greater than me. Um, and so what happens is when these ideas start emerging of like, because the people still have the problem of like figuring out what their identity is. And for the ancients, their identity was bound up in their understanding of nature and the gods and things outside of themselves. But modern man, having abandoned those things and having denied those things, has looked for his identity within himself. And guess what's inside yourself? Nothing but turmoil and strife. It's just like um, just chaos of emotions and will and all these things. And so it makes sense that there are like, a gazillion different genders because people are trying to figure out who they are using themselves as a reference point and being subject to the kind of like social contagion of this idea that you can decide who you are based on yourself. And I think that's why a lot of these groups, like, you hear stories about like people trying to shut down transgender reading time at libraries or shut down drag shows for kids, and they get really upset and they're like, "Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Like, this is obviously a good thing to do." Um, but they're never able to explain exactly why it's a good thing to do, and that's because it's completely personal for them. They're so convicted that it's right because they're doing it. There's no kind of um, they don't relate anything that they do to the general good of the public because the greatest thing out there is themselves, right? The ancient people had the gods that was better than themselves, and they formed their cities and their cultures around the gods. But nowadays, our cities and our cultures are trying to be formed around the self, which is impossible. And so you have these like crazy epidemics, and it really is an epidemic. This transgender thing is an epidemic. People are just falling into it like crazy because they want to be selfish, really, and they will adopt anything that helps them do that, even if it means mutilating children. They will push the ideas as far as they can if it means that they can affirm themselves. That's why they call it gender affirming care, right? Because affirming means like you tell someone that they're right. And unfortunately, you also started to see this in like, I mean, the government obviously, like the social construct of our society has fallen into this kind of ideology in a different way. This movement of transgenderism isn't really all that different from all the other kind of like selfish movements that have been going on throughout our modern era. But you also see it infiltrating things like the church as well. And just tons of other social institutions and religious institutions. So yeah, that's kind of my spiel. I think that because mankind, or especially because the culture of America has abandoned the sense that there really is an active God that we actually see before us as something other than ourselves. The only other thing left is ourselves. We are, in terms of our creation around us, we are the highest thing. After that is God. And if you reject God, then you're the highest thing, and that's hell. We are not self-redeeming creatures.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, and yeah, there's you nailed. I mean, you nailed all the talking points right there. I've got a couple things that just really stood out to me that you said, and I think one of those things is this idea that we've, as a society, completely rejected God. We've made ourselves God, and one thing I think, one thing I think's really, whether you're religious or not, I think there's this important realization that you have to have that no matter who you are, you aren't the most important thing in society, right? You aren't God, and obviously the truth is that, and this is what I firmly believe is that there is a God out there, and and um, and there's a greater purpose that I have in my life because I know I'm not the most important thing, right? And I think one podcast that really a comment that was made in Jordan Peterson's podcast with Abigail Shirer on this topic was that he commented on this idea of identity and these people that are claiming what their identity is. And he said, identity is not who you think and feel you are, not only who you think and feel you are, but also what your use is or what your purpose is in society. And I
Hmm.
think that has a lot. I think that has a lot of meaning to what you're saying there. And he says it more in a secular term, but I think it gives this idea of a greater purpose in life, other than yourself, outside of yourself.
Yeah. No,
And and I yeah, and I think that's, at least for me, when I was thinking about this idea, I was like, well, where's the what's the disconnect? Where have we gone as a society, right? That has caused us to get to this point where we're saying, I know what's right, I know what's wrong, I know what truth is. I can define truth. And I think that's a really dangerous thing, because I think if you're so arrogant to say that I know what truth is, you're essentially claiming that, like you said, you are God. You know what's best. And that idea of knowing what truth is allows you to be able to say to the rest of society, you don't know what truth is. I know what truth is. I know who I am, and you know, you can't tell me I'm not, because I know what truth is. I know my own truth. I believe,
mm,
you have to listen to my truth because it's my truth. And that's something I hear a lot, is when people are, especially people that talk about this issue, they always talk about their truth. I'm a woman because it's my, I feel that it's my truth. It's where I feel like I belong. Well, that's great and all, but to be fair, there's psychopaths that out there that think that killing people is is their truth, right?
yeah.
Is
Yeah.
is and and I think most sane people would agree that killing other people is not a truth that we should affirm. It's not a truth. So there is truth. There should be this idea of what's right, what's wrong, and there is a truth. But when you become so arrogant to say that I know what truth is, that's when I think you start to see this, I think, of erosion of everything moral. I think all morality kind of falls to the wayside.
Yeah.
And then you start to see the proliferation, of issues like this, or abortion, or whatever the issue might be. I mean, it's just, when we decide as people that we know what's best, and we know what's best for us, and other people can just kind of screw off if
Yeah.
they disagree with us, it causes a lot of issues, I think.
Yeah. I thought you said that very well. And just a couple of things that I thought about when you were saying that was, I mean, kind of looking at these problems, you kind of imagine like, how on earth are people so crazy that they actually believe these things? Like, how do they get to this point? Um, but I think in a lot of small ways, we do exactly what they're doing all the time, and that's when we're doing something, and maybe we know it's wrong to do this thing, maybe we're doing something bad, and we like maybe it's a bad habit or something. We're very quick to defend ourselves in front of people about what we're doing, and but as soon as you do that, you either have to say, I have to face the truth and say what I'm doing is actually wrong, or I have to reinvent the wheel of truth. And that just has a cascading effect on everything else that you believe. Like, I have to say, like, then you have to say, like, I'm a good person, even though because of the thing that I'm doing, which is probably wrong. Like, if you have, everything changes if you don't stick to the truth. And so I think for a lot of these people, it's like you either accept the truth or you create an entirely new system of what truth is based on your own personal experience of the things that you're doing, which are probably wrong, because you have to defend yourself,
Yeah.
or they feel like they have to defend themselves, and that's where the arrogance and the pride comes in. It's like, I don't know, it's a good example. It's like, if someone has a really bad habit of like not doing the dishes or not cleaning their room, like really bad, where it's like you can't even see the floor or the countertop anymore. And someone comes into their house and they're like, "Hey man, you should clean your dishes. Like this is a mess." And they're like, "What mess? What are you talking about?" It's like the same mentality that comes with like hoarders, right? They hoard all the stuff and they collect all the stuff and say, well maybe I'll need that someday, and maybe I'll need this someday. It's like, rather than admitting the fact that their house is a mess, you can't even see the house anymore. They're willing to reconstruct reality, and there's like a psychological thing there, but there's also kind of a thing with the will and the desire and the pride that kind of blends into that as well. But and I think what that creates is something. I was thinking about this earlier when you were talking. Um, and I know Tom will know this really well. I don't know how much classical education you've had, but the the stuff that we're seeing out in society right now really reminds me of the way that different people act towards each other, like with the transgender stuff, the CRT, the Black Lives Matter, all these crazy things that are going on. It really reminds me about how the gods acted towards each other in like Greek myths. Like they're
Yes. Yeah.
arrogant, petty, super selfish. There's not a single god in the Greek myths that is actually caring or loving of the other one. They're just like they're the epitomes of these selfish, like petty bastards. and and like they just fight for what they think is right. And they all have their favorite humans that they're going for, and they're like, I want this human to succeed, and the other god's like, no, I want that human to succeed. And like they're just pitted against each other all the time. And because they really can't see each other in a sense. They don't really understand each other, um, and because they only understand themselves. And the Greeks kind of understood. They understood this kind of like phenomenology of the human psyche, where it's like there are people and there are these elements within the character of individuals that if you don't balance them correctly, like people are just going to be like extremely selfish and extremely like, I just want this thing all the time. Like Aphrodite is the goddess of lust because all she wants to do is promote lust. And there are people out there that all they want to do is be lustful. Um, and yeah, they just fight with each other constantly. It kind of reminds me of like what's happening nowadays with like these transgender people that they think they're doing something really right by indoctrinating kids and having, genitalia chopped off their bodies. And they're like, what we're doing is right, and no one can argue with us. And it's like that little tiny God is pitted against the other God, which is reason. And like they're all these things are kind of fighting against each other. And it's someone could write a ballad about this. I'm sure historians years from now will be perplexed and but also kind of amused with how similar we look to the Greek gods, our culture today.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's amazing to me, like that human beings really just repeat the same sort of issues over and over again, and they might manifest themselves in different ways over time, right? But really the same core issues are there, and we never really get out of this cycle. And I think the thing that stands out to me the most, and I found a quote about this actually this past week, actually from Aristotle. But he was talking about the soul and the body, and I think a lot of the issues that we face today are a direct result of the deterioration of the soul and of like this moral compass that we have. And he was talking about how the soul and the body are essentially one. They react sympathetically on one another. And I'll read the quote real quick because I thought it was a really interesting quote, and I think it has. I was thinking about it, and I was like, this has a lot of implications for what we're seeing today with the whether it's the just the mutilation of the human body or the objectification of the human body, whatever it might be. And I think there's this direct correlation between the the erosion of the soul and the erosion of our, I guess the best word for it is the erosion of our the way we look at the human body. And so Aristotle says the soul and the body, I suggest, reacting sympathetically upon each other. A change in the state of the soul produces a change in the shape of the body, and conversely, a change in the shape of the body produces a change in the state of the soul. And I thought this was really interesting because, when I think about somebody that's really disciplined, has a strong moral compass, you typically don't see those people as, I always think of somebody that's very disciplined, not only mentally but physically as well. I think a lot of times I think of like an athlete, and this is kind of where my mind goes. You've got this person that's got a very disciplined um, mental state, but also very disciplined, and it shows through their body, right? But I think as soon as the soul begins to deteriorate because of whatever it might be, you start to become lazy in one thing, and that just leads to the next thing, and eventually you get to this point where the body is completely deteriorated to the point where you hate I think you hate your own body because you hate who you are deep down in your soul, right? And I was thinking about this because I was thinking about, what causes a human being to get to the point where you want to mutilate the body that you've been given. And I think it's a self-hatred for who you are deep down. And that's found in your soul. So it's a complete deterioration of the soul, complete self-hatred of the soul that results in, at least the way I see it, a complete rejection of the
Mm.
form, the physical form of the soul, essentially, because the soul and the body are in a sense one. And so if you hate who you are, you know spiritually, you're going to hate who you are physically as well, I think.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, yeah, the body always wars against, or is always battling against the intellect, right? It's always trying to just be satisfied, however it can, and it's up to the intellect, it's up to the will to direct the body towards its better self, right? The body just wants to eat the donut, but the mind knows that if the body eats the donut too many times, there's gonna be a lot more body, and it's not gonna be good body. Um,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's kind of amazing. It's kind of a it really the relate. I mean, I kind of imagine kind of like personifying the relationship between the mind or the soul and the body is kind of a one way love relationship where the soul is trying to love the body as much as possible, but the body rejects it. And as soon as the soul adopts the sense of reject, like stops loving, the body shows the effects of that, which is, people become obese or people become lazy, or um, when people are convinced that they shouldn't love their bodies because they maybe feel a different way, um, they start to hate their body because it just doesn't reflect who they think they are. Yeah, so once the soul and the mind start to lose that love for the body that they're supposed to have, you start to see the effects of that lack of love through the body, through the deformities, or the obesity, or the laziness, or the lack of self-care, all of those things. And it's also just, I just think this is incredible in kind of a phenomenological way, I guess, maybe, um, that when the soul is hurting, we're convinced, most of the time we're convinced that we have to do something to our body to make our soul feel better. And so people will take to, you know eating disorders, or drinking too much, or smoking too much, or doing other crazy things to try to make their soul feel better, or mutilating their body, changing it to make their soul feel better. It's unbelievable. Like how many people think that, oh, if I just, if I just change this thing, if I just cut off this part of my body, my soul will be healed. Like I will finally be the person that I want to be. It's like, don't you understand that the part of you that is wanting to do something, the part of you that is thinking about wanting to do something isn't your body, it's your soul. Your body is like completely outside of that kind of faculty. But once you do something, your body is just receiving kind of all the decisions that you make. As soon as you do that to your body, it's done. You can't change it. Um, and you didn't actually fix anything because you can't cut part of your soul out or replace. You can't transplant part of your soul. Um, so yeah, I don't know. That quote from Aristotle is really, it's very simple, but I think it's very powerful. It's just it's the truth. It's the truth, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the truth that people have decided not to acknowledge because, as well as denying God, um, people have also denied the soul, right?
Mm-hmm.
So once you deny the soul, your body is the only thing. So of course, people are convinced that if I mutilate it and change it, it'll change how I feel or change who I am. But yeah, it's a booby trap. It's an intellectual booby trap.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when I look at the vast majority of people that go through these gender changes, most of the time they already go into these gender changes unhappy with something in their life. Whether it's feeling like they're a misfit in society or just looking for a way to, quote, find themselves.
Hmm.
Um, I think I think a lot of it comes nowadays, we're told, if you're a misfit, if you're trying to, you haven't found yourself, maybe, it's pushed on social media, it's pushed through our peers, whatever it might be, it's pushed that, oh, well, maybe you just, haven't found the gender you're supposed to be. We've made this a gender issue. And really, it's an issue that the human person, I feel like, has been dealing with since the beginning of time, finding yourself. And we've just decided it's recently that it's more of a
Hmm.
gender issue because it's an easy cop out. It's an easy thing to say. Well, you don't feel like you found your purpose, your meaning in life, and less and less people are finding that today because we've changed what purpose and meaning is. But you're having trouble finding your purpose and meaning in life, where you fit in society, where you fit in with everybody else. It's probably just because you're not in the right body, you're not the right gender. And it's an easy thing in theory to change for somebody. They'd be like, oh well, I'll just go through this gender, replace hormone replacement therapy, whatever it might be.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, affirmative care, affirmative. Yeah, but it essentially is a cop out. It's taking the quote easy way out of this really human issue of trying to
Hmm.
discover what is your purpose, because it's something every person for the entirety of I feel like the human person has been trying. What is my greater purpose? Who am I? you
Hmm.
know that human question, the ultimate question, really. And we've just chosen to, I think, push it aside and mask it and make it quote easy to fix, is
Yeah.
this discomfort. And now more than ever, people can't handle the smallest amount of discomfort, mentally, emotionally, physically. So you get this little bit of discomfort that says, who am I? What is my purpose? And what is the purpose of living? And it sends people off the deep end, I think. And I think and when you're told, there's an easy fix for that. You're a guy, well, you're probably actually a girl, and you should probably, chop off your dick and
Bye bye day.
Or take hormone blockers and medically castrate yourself, whatever it might be.
Mm.
But it's it's just yeah, I think it's shocking to me that we've been able to take the ultimate question, the ultimate human issue of purpose, of what is my purpose in life, and turn it into something as terrible as this. But
Yeah. Well, I want to say one thing, and then I want to hear Tom talk.
I know. I feel like we're stealing the show here. I feel bad. Tom's over there listening to us. I feel like
Tom is so in all of the great knowledge that we are trying to put out there. But so, I mean, this is kind of a pet peeve of mine. Um, it's a very common phrase. So I obviously I say it a lot myself, but whenever I hear someone say like finding yourself, and I understand that, I understand what they're trying to say when they say that. I understand what you're trying to say when you say that, but I mean, for a lot of these people, and I think for most people, we're not really looking to find ourselves. We're looking to find ourselves at peace. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
there's a French philosopher, kind of poet guy named Jacques Maritain who talks about the self as the inner part of yourself is kind of this unknowable thing only known to God. And when we see God, we'll know ourselves, right?
hmm,
Because we'll see ourselves as God sees us. Um, our ability to know ourselves is kind of limited to our senses, but also our ability to contemplate our intellect. But I think everybody wants peace and everybody wants to see themselves at any given moment in a state of peace. And this hunt for peace takes people on all sorts of crazy roads, including chopping stuff off of your body in order to do so. But so yeah, I don't know. I just thought of that. It wasn't like something I've been thinking about for a while, but I think that most people when they say I'm trying to find out who I am, I'm looking for myself, what they really mean is like I'm looking for peace.
yeah, yeah.
So
I think you're absolutely right there. And I won't take up too much more time here. I'll just comment. I think if you look back across history, usually when people are trying to find this peace, they look to something greater than themselves, right? A higher power. And and I think that's for a reason is we can't find that peace within us. And the only way to find that peace is to find God. And and that's something we've completely removed from society. So it's nearly impossible to find that peace if we've completely removed God from our lives and our society. So I think that was really well said. Thanks, Isaac.
welcome. Okay, Tom, it's your turn.
No, I'm listening to you guys. You have a lot of really good points. I've kind of just been thinking over them. Something else I've been kind of wondering about is like in that search for peace that each person has. It seems like there's also like a that this deep like desire for acceptance, and I wonder if it has something to do with that fundamental desire for love. And acceptance is one of the fundamental, I guess you could call it a precondition for love. You accept what something is and you love it as it is and you want it to become better. So, the only person that can love unconditionally is God. And He's the only one that can have total acceptance of us and then take what we have and then make it into something great. And I've noticed lately that there's been a really big shift from becoming people that are attracted to certain things and are therefore attractive to where we want to become the thing we admire rather than become a person worthy of being responsible for it. So, for example, it seems like how the marriage age for marriage has gotten significantly higher this past couple of decades. Like people aren't really sure if they want to get married or if they really want to be in a long-term relationship, and it seems to have a lot more to do with where both the men and the women become less feminine and less masculine. So the people that end up actually get married are usually very feminine, masculine people. But the people who aren't kind of just in that neutral zone where they're not really sure if they want to be a man or a woman. And then they think that, well, if I'm attracted, maybe if I become more like them, then they'll accept me more. Um, it's an interesting paradox because it seems like it makes sense on the surface, but at the same time, usually you're attracted to something outside of what you have already because you want something better. So, like for guys, it's like reason like we're supposed to be attracted to a woman is because it's generally someone who's a lot better, and it raises our cultural um, livelihood, the way we live, um, so that we become worthy of accepting or of receiving the acceptance of someone like that. And then kind of vice versa, it's like the woman is becoming something worthy enough of a man giving himself to her throughout his whole life. So then when we try to like say, well, I I'm not that attractive, I guess, so maybe if I become more like them, then they'll accept me because then I'll be something familiar to them. But familiarity generally leads to, I guess you could say boredom. Like if you're super familiar with everything, then you're kind of
Yeah,
gonna be
yeah, I
bored
would
with
say
everything.
boredom. Yeah, yeah.
Um, so you inevitably have a lot of really boring people because if they're all trying to morph into this one general identity, or this one general idea of what they think is good, then you'll have a lot of people that are just kind of weird. Um, and I think you see where people like try to blend into the crowd, like they want to fit in, but then they're like, well, I'm fitting in too much. I have to do something really weird to get attention now because I fit in so much. So then it's like, well, I'm gonna be like more or less of a man, like a woman. I won't have as much of like a competitive personality. I'll just kind of like go with the flow. It's kind of like a difference, like guys are usually much more harder in games, like intense, like want to have a real challenge, where women are more like accepting to just like see what things are happening, like just talk to people. But then they're like, okay, I'm more like a woman, but then I need to be something different because I can't just be a woman. I need to be something that'll catch people's attention now as like being more like a woman. So then they like do something weird with their clothing, and it seems like it escalates more and more into this like I have to do something drastic and crazy to get people's attention now to be accepted again. It's so interesting because it's like the thing they're looking for fundamentally is to being accepted, but to be accepted, you have to be a person who's going out beyond yourself to find
Mm.
interesting things.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's interesting. When I was listening to that podcast with Jordan Peterson and Abigail Shirer, one of the things mentioned was that most of these young girls that were going through these gender changes hadn't experienced any sort of relationship with an opposite sex in any romantic, way, and whether it's just dating or something like that. But they hadn't experienced any of most of them hadn't experienced a relationship with um, a man or I mean, they're younger, so a boy. But still, I think that needing for love and acceptance from somebody else, that it is really interesting to see, because a lot of these people, I think, fundamentally are broken. They're looking for love and acceptance, and they I don't know if it's a conclusion they come to, but I think it's maybe just the human psyche says, well, you're not loved and accepted for who you are, maybe you should change who you are so you can be loved and accepted. And I think that's the ultimate yearning for like the human, as us as human beings, to be loved and accepted by God. And God's the only one that can satisfy that love and acceptance. So if we don't have God in our lives, there's no human being that's gonna quench that yearning for love and acceptance. And so I think that's like fundamentally, at least from how I see it, this this brokenness as a whole of society nowadays. It seems to be stemming from this need, this yearning for the love and acceptance of God.
Yeah, I think that there's in relation to the idea that people are always looking for love, which or yeah, acceptance, which I think is probably at the heart of the matter. It seems to be kind of a twofold problem, where it's like there isn't enough um, supply for the demand, to use economic terms. Everybody wants to be loved and accepted, but not enough people are willing to love and accept people. Also, our definition of love has, in the general sense, has kind of been changed or shifted with the abandonment of objective truth. Um, because loving somebody doesn't just mean cuddling with them or telling them they look nice. It's telling them when they're wrong. It's telling them the truth. But if people don't want to accept the truth, and if everybody has their own truth, how are you supposed to love them? So, and I think the transgender community is really in the middle of this conundrum where they have a huge demand for people to love them, not as much of a supply, really. Because I think most average people, if they actually knew what was going on with this stuff, they wouldn't love it, right? Most people just really don't know what's going on. And then it's really hard to love a lie or love something that is denying the truth. And what they're doing and how they see themselves and how they think other people should see themselves is not the truth. And so it's actually impossible to love somebody or love something if it's not the truth. Thomas Aquinas, and I think it's actually, he's drawing from Augustine, talks about this model for the Trinity. And he says that God is kind of like a man who has an idea, a perfect idea. And that idea is kind of like he's thinking about himself. And so that image of himself would be Christ. And then upon having this idea, he knows it perfectly because he's God. But at the same time, when he knows it perfectly, the truth, he loves it perfectly at the same time. It's like the same action. Knowing something perfectly and loving it are the same action. And that's the person of the Holy Spirit. And so, but I thought that was really important when he said that when you know something, when you know the truth, you immediately love it. Right? It's like when you don't know how to play a stupid board game that you play for the first time and you're like, I don't know how these pieces move, or I don't know how to play this game. Like, this is frustrating. I don't know how it works. You don't really like it. Especially if you're me. I hate playing board games that I don't know how to play. Unfortunately, that's the only way you learn. But I guess the point is that you really only know or love something when you come to know it. But you can't come to know something if you're being told lies all the time. And it's really hard for me, um, so I'm such a grouch, to love or to show love or affection for people that are just spouting lies all the time, especially like the transgender movement or the critical race theory. It's just like it's a nest of lies, and it's like they want me to love them, but there's nothing to like for what, at least for what they're saying. Not aside from their human dignity, what they're saying is there's nothing to love there. So it's really like twofold, strange, horrible problem. And I think that every single person has experienced or is currently experiencing that problem in some capacity, because we don't always hold to the truth, and people recognize that. Um, Yeah. So this problem of like knowledge and loving, it's twofold.
That's really well said, Isaac. I mean, I've never heard it put in that way before, but that makes so much sense. Like, um, knowing the truth and then loving it immediately. And that makes a lot of sense with this transgender community is that they're trying to tell you that love me as a lie. And you can't really, I mean, subconsciously you can't even because no one wants to be told a lie. Like, that's one of the fundamental, like, I guess you could say axioms of human interaction is no one ever wants to be told a lie or have someone tell a lie. Like, even people that aren't the greatest don't really want their kids to tell them lies. That's considered like a bad thing for your kids to be a liar in general. So if these people are saying, love me as a lie, then we're saying, well, we can't really. We can't love you as a lie. We can love the truth about you, and we will love you more the more you come to the truth. And we can help you come to the truth, but you have to be willing to let go of these self deceptions brought about by almost like a inordinate amount of wanting of acceptance. I'm not sure how to phrase that exactly, but it's like whatever spurred their decision to want to be transgender, there's something really wrong there. So whatever that cause is, we would have to help them find that in order to help them heal. And then through that healing, we will become better friends with them, we could say, because then we'll see the truth more with them.
I think one other sorry, my camera's off.
Okay.
I think one other way of looking at it too is that um, the object of love is being, right? The object of love is something that exists. You can't love something that doesn't exist. And what these people are trying to promote about themselves and what they want us to think about them is something that doesn't exist. There's no such thing as there's no such thing as multiple like genders besides, or I shouldn't even say the word gender because that's like not even the right word. They're kind of made that up. There's no such thing as multiple sexes beyond male and female. They're trying to make us believe that there is. And you can't love something that doesn't exist or that is contrary to what does exist. Um, and you really do want to like to love people and love some of these people, preferably all people. But when they're promoting things that are contrary to existence or being itself, it's very difficult. It's I mean, and this is I'm not trying to say these people should go to hell or something, but this is what a lot of theologians express the reality of hell to be is people people in a constant state, a state in their soul of denying the truth and denying being, and ultimately denying God, but denying existence and goodness itself all the time. They're just like they just will not accept it, and they're just constantly in the state of denying and not knowing, and therefore not loving anything. And yeah, like I'm saying, I'm not saying these people are in hell right now. They might be in something very similar to it, but yeah, it's just and and you can see how chaotic their lives are because and how our lives are becoming because of all this. Like they're because they've decided to deny being in reality. Honestly, it is really making hell on earth for a lot of people. Like all these poor kids, um, all these poor young girls that are being sucked into this ideology and just hating themselves for the rest of their lives. I think have you both of you seen the Matt Walsh documentary? What is a woman?
Yeah, I was telling Tom I saw the preview. I've seen some clips from it, but I haven't actually watched it. but it's on my
You know,
list of things to watch because I think a lot of the things. I mean, just the basic premise: what is a woman? Asking people what is a woman, and most of these people can't even give an adequate answer. But it really, yeah, it. I watched the clip with the I forget her name. She was a gender affirming physician, and just the apps. I mean, she was like, I hate to put it in crude terms, but like an absolute crackpot. I mean, she was off the wall. I mean, some of the things she was saying, she wouldn't even deny there's no Santa Claus. I mean, like this lady was absolutely crazy. She couldn't. I don't know if it wasn't she couldn't accept truth or what truth was, but she definitely couldn't acknowledge what truth was. Um, to Matt, and I was just like blown away by it. I was like, "Oh my gosh, these are the people that are, telling parents their kids have to get basically chemical castration, like, and and acting like it's just like popping an Advil. It'll fix it temporarily. It's a temporary fix, something like that. It blew my mind, and I was like, this is absolutely disgusting.
and I was thinking in particular, I'm sure you've seen a clip of it. He interviews this guy. Well, hold on a second. There's a guy, I think. Anyway, this individual underwent, I'm not sure because I, anyway, it's actually really confusing, but it was this individual that underwent um, hormone therapy and gender affirming care from a young age. And in the interview, he was like 30 or 35. And he just talking about how damaging and how like just so horrible it was. Like he will never look like it ever again. I don't know if you've seen that clip with that guy. I can't remember the guy's name, but he was just talking about like the self hatred that comes from the damaging of the body. And most of these people don't know what they're doing. They're not even old enough to realize that these things have consequences. It's like, yeah, a 15-year-old girl might want to be a boy right now. In 10 years, she's going to be like, wow, I was acting like a stupid teenager. Oh, yeah, like everybody else does that. It's like, I look
Yeah.
back when I was 14, I'm like, I don't even know who that person is.
Hmm.
I got
Hmm.
home. He made the dumbest decisions ever. He like thought he was in the world and thought that everything he did, he was what he wanted right now. Like, how are people? And well, I asked the question, how are people so blind to that? It's not really a matter of them being blind. It's just they want the money for it. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the exact point that Abigail Shirer from the Wall Street Journal brought up, and that's the reason she wrote that book, Irreversible Damage, is that whether you support the transgender movement or not, you have to recognize the destruction it's causing in the young communities of America, um, especially among young girls. I mean, when people don't understand, like when you use terms like hormone blockers, these pills that they give kids, these things aren't just a temporary. They don't put a pause like that gender affirming therapist. She liked to use that. She wouldn't accept the fact of that these hormone blockers actually essentially is a act as a chemical castration. Some of which are actually used to cast or essentially chemically castrate sex offenders, and that was a point that Matt Walsh brought up. She wouldn't even accept or acknowledge the fact that that's true. These aren't something these pills, these treatments that they give these kids that are not old enough to consent. They're not of consenting age. And if you have any sort of brain, I think that you could say that a kid that isn't able to consent to having sex probably shouldn't be able to consent to having their body altered for the rest of their lives. I don't think that should be a contentious issue. I think that should be pretty straightforward for most common sense people. But regardless of that, I think the fact that these these drugs, these treatments that they're administering to these kids are completely irreversible is just absolutely devastating when you're talking about kids that, like you said, 14, 15 years old, they don't know what they want. I didn't know what I wanted at 14, 15 years old. Shoot. I mean, I don't even know what I wanted at 14 or 15. I can't even think back. I know it probably wasn't something good. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but at 14 or 15, I probably like wanted to do something stupid.
But just when yeah, when I was I mean, this is probably not the worst thing I could talk about when I was 14, but me and my older brothers used to like jump on the train and ride. I mean, I guess that's not that bad, but it
it
might
could it could
it's
be
getting
it could
kind
be
of
a
like
lot it could be a lot worse.
2 hours. But yeah, we just like jump on this train because we're like, oh, this is a great idea. No, we won't get caught. This isn't like a dangerous thing to do. 14 years old. Like,
Yeah. And I think that was the point that if I'm gonna actually look it up right now, but when Matt Walsh was talking to that lady that was a gender affirming therapist, he brought up the point. He's like, well, a 3-year-old believes in Santa Claus. Does that mean Santa Claus is real? And she wouldn't acknowledge like 3, 4, 5, 6-year old knows what's right, wrong, true, not
that
true.
is true.
Yeah, what is truth exactly? And it's this idea that we can, each individual person can define what truth is, and truth is whatever they think it is. It's left up to their imagination. It's this crazy um it's a it's this crazy idea. I mean, it's just insane. I it blows my mind. I watched that and I honestly I got through it, but at first I thought I wasn't going to be able to get through the clip because it was just so absurd. I was like, I can't believe there is somebody that claims to be a like a physician that is claiming these things. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. I mean, it's incredible. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, something else that I thought was really strange is how um, there's like such an emphasis on everything being natural these days, like natural food, natural like health habits, and then to do something like a transgender, that's like the most unnatural thing you can do. Like a hard thing is like replacing an organ, like that's a really big deal and it's pretty timely and hard to do. So by them trying to like take stuff out, replace it, and like I heard like a lot of these poor girls they have to shave their arms off pretty
Yeah.
much to make the organ parts. And so they like lose one like most of their forearm and one arm. Then it goes on and they have to do like hip surgeries and they have to do shoulder surgeries and then like their faces are being contorted and it's like the like how in the world is this natural and okay to do when a lot of people say like gas from cars is dangerous to breathe. It's like, well, the level of like damage is just unbelievable from trying these practices. And like Abigail Shirer was saying, there's very few that are actually capable of doing this because it's such an intense like medical procedure. A lot of times they mess it up really badly, and these poor kids just are in complete pain.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was I mean, I listened to that and I was just completely disturbed. One of the things that I mean, it's so sad, but like you said, these surgeries they do to create essentially the uh a fake uh you know phallus for a girl, they remove the skin from the forearm and they reconstruct it essentially. But there's only a certain amount of, I mean, really, it takes a very skilled surgeon to do that. And these hospitals are pushed to do these surgeries because they're very lucrative as far as the profits they bring in. And so you have these hospitals that are pushing these surgeries at the expense of young girls. I mean, that is just absolutely despicable. And it really shocked me. I mean, you'd like to have a lot of faith in the medical community. Unfortunately, these days I can't say I do. But it's really sad to see. Yeah, it's sad to see people being taken advantage of in their in their states of vulnerability, um, for the sake of profit. And yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I listened to that podcast with Jordan Peterson. Was really, I mean, it was a great podcast, but I was listening to that part and I was just like, oh my gosh, like it was truly disturbing to hear the levels of just, mutilation that go on in these surgeries. I mean, I think if more people heard that, we'd have probably a different, I would hope we would have a different perspective as a society on these surgeries. But I don't know if I could say that that's true or not. But yeah, it was crazy. I guess I didn't realize personally, the level and the extent that these surgeries have, and the absolute invasion of, yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, you'd think that people would have learned like what these kind of surgeries do to you after seeing like what happened to like Michael Jackson and stuff. Like you kind of look like a goblin close to the end of his life because like he just like the plastic surgery. I mean, obviously it was earlier plastic surgery, but still like that effect is going to happen. We're going to see a lot of people in like 30 or 40 years from now where they're like their faces are falling off or like their shoulders are popping out or their new and improved fake sexual organs are deteriorating. Like we're going to see a lot of that, I think, because that's just what happens. Like when you mess with the body in a way that is unnatural, like Tom was saying, um, things are not going to go well in the long term. And that's the thing that's so frustrating. Like I'm definitely not the best at thinking about things in the long term, but I know that if I were to go out and get some sort of surgery right now and have the immediate effect of doing that right now today, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, that's when the effect is going to start showing. And that's when I'm going to be really thinking, why did I do that? And none of these kids have that capacity in their mind. They don't have the ability for a foresight. Like we were talking about when we were 14. Like I didn't know when I was 14 that jumping on trains was well, I knew it was against the law, but I didn't really know that like what the consequences of that were. But now I'm like, well, gosh, thank goodness I didn't caught because those consequences would have been really bad. And it's the same thing with this like transgender stuff. Like all the kid wants is to feel good right now. He doesn't really care what's happening 15 years from now. So it's yeah.
Yeah. Not to mention that, actually, the level of mental development in teens is actually, the age is going up and up. So now, I think there was a study done, and I'd have to find this, but I believe the like if you look at the mental development of a 22-year-old 10 years ago, it would be the equivalent to the mental development of a 25, 26-year-old today. So we're not only seeing these decisions being forced on really young people, but also our mental development as human beings is, the average age is being pushed up. So we have less and less capability of making these very critical decisions and critical thinking and critical, this critical like really, I mean, we're not recognizing that human beings are declining mentally to a certain extent. I think that's probably due a lot to technology and the push of technology. We don't have to think as hard for ourselves. I mean, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but I think that has maybe a little bit to do with it. And we definitely have to use less and less critical thinking skills now than we did even probably 15 years ago. But it is interesting to think, if the 24-year-old isn't able to think as clearly as a 22-year-old from 10 years ago, what is a 14-year-old, what decisions are a 14-year-old able to make? And they're definitely not able to make these decisions. And that's really the scary thing. And that's where it's scary to see legislation that's, telling parents that if they don't affirm their child's decision at 14 years old to get gender therapy, that they'll lose custody of that child, that they'll have to go to, child services will come and take custody of that. I mean, that's just insane. I just don't know how we've gotten to that point, but here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, wild stuff. Tom, you got anything for us?
I don't know. I mean, that was all pretty good stuff, you guys. I think maybe a way to help reach these kids is to show them what the beauty of living a good life the way God intended. Like, I think the thing that's made me most attracted to like the idea of marriage is being around young couples, honestly. Like them, especially with their new families. It's like you didn't really have a perspective of that as a kid because you just saw all the things you're worried about. But as growing up as an adult, you're thinking, wow, it's a real joy to have, a family and a home and all of those wonderful things that come along with it. Like, yeah, just the idea of a long time life that you're devoted to and you're working towards. It's so much more freeing and um, hopeful than just like figuring out what I'm gonna try to do today or tomorrow and what fun I could have or whatever, or what weird thing I can try out today. It's yeah. So yeah, maybe that's something like because a lot of these people they find most of their influence on like social media platforms for like snippets of like someone's life or something they did. You just see a reel of all these different people's lives, and then they think that they have to compare their everyday life to like these hyper reels, and then they're like, well, I can't really live up to that, and so they kind of fall into a depression and things. But yeah, I just been thinking about that a little bit of like, how do you show people what a good life looks like outside of, and maybe we could go inside of those mediums, but that was just something I was thinking about when you guys were talking.
Yeah, it's like how do we inspire hope? Another way of saying it, like how do we inspire hope into people? And yeah, I mean, there's so many, like you said, there's so many families that are just so broken or so like not complete, non-existent, really, that are creating a lot of these problems, um, or at least the basis for a lot of these problems. And yeah, I think a lot of people have kind of given up hope on having good families or having good like community life, and so they delve into the life of the self and all the desires of the self. I think it's a big problem.
Yeah. It's like, I wonder too if it had a lot of, like, the reason why this has spiked so rapidly so quickly was all the isolation that's been around for the past couple of years. Because that was something else that Peterson and Shirer were talking about, was how most of these girls that are doing this sort of stuff, they aren't really around many people, and they don't really have many external influences besides media. So it almost seems like it would have to come through like just true human interaction that brings about a change of heart. Bring hope.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's probably especially difficult when you're, especially now with this, I like to call it the social media generation, when your main form of interaction is through this kind of fake, phony platform that you really only see whatever someone wants to share. And a lot of the time, I feel like that's something that's completely manufactured. You know, it's a highlight reel in some aspects, and I think if that's your main form of interaction with other people, I think that can be extremely damaging to your psyche, and to have to deal with that on a daily basis, I'm sure is extremely difficult. I mean, I try to limit myself as much as possible from that, but I can't imagine the pressure there is for young people in their teens today to be a part of those platforms, but also to deal with the challenges and the struggles that come with those platforms. Because I mean, really, social media is a pretty toxic place most of the time, and yeah, I can't imagine the damage that, or the toll that it takes mentally to have to to have to utilize that as your main form of interaction with other human beings, and not have a physical or a vocal interaction with other humans. I mean, it's just, I think that's something that's probably lost more now than ever, and I think that probably contributes to this a little bit. It's just the physical connection between us and others, and I think that I mean, it makes a huge. I know it makes a huge difference for me to be able to get on and talk with you, Tom. You know, once or twice a week. I mean, it makes a huge difference. It's so much. There's so much more meaning behind the conversation than just a text message, right? It's getting on and seeing a face or hearing a voice. I think that makes a huge difference. And so, yeah, I can't imagine what it's like to be in an age or kind of this demographic that really only communicates via text or social media. It's got to be, yeah, it's got to be really challenging. But yeah, I think I don't know how you guys are feeling, but I feel like we've maybe talked ourselves into a lull here, and I think there's probably plenty to cover if we want to come back next week and chat about these issues. But I think this was a really great conversation. I really enjoyed it. So thanks,
Yeah,
guys, for thanks
thanks for
for
having.
yeah, thanks, Isaac. I really appreciate you coming on tonight and sharing your thoughts and ideas. And I think Tom, I mean, I won't speak for both of us, but I really enjoyed this conversation. Yeah, I think it was a really good one, and I'd be more than happy to continue it next week if we have the chance.
I would love to do.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, guys, I'll close this out, but yeah, thanks again. I think this week to all our listeners, if you wanna find any of the links for the topics we talked about, I'll link those all in the comments below on both YouTube, Spotify. But you can also go check out our Instagram page, Green Dragon Podcast on Instagram. You'll see some of the news links on our highlight reel for the world news and the domestic news. But most importantly, this week, I think it's something that I'll try to take into this week is to try to be a more empathetic person to those around me, to try to really understand where people are coming from. But yeah, be be safe this week. Be a good neighbor, be a good person, but most importantly, stay true to your thoughts, stay true to your morals, and be a good American. God bless you all, and have a great night.